By the time I finally picked up my phone, there were 89 missed calls and a single terrifying text message from my mother. It read, "We know it was you. You bought that ticket with our family money, so you better open this door right now, Sienna, or we are calling the police." Just 3 days earlier, I sat in silence at the family dining table watching them laugh as they handed my golden child sister the keys to a $90,000 luxury SUV. My gift from them was a $5 lottery ticket tossed across the table like an afterthought. A joke to mock my career and my life. But the joke was on them. Because that crumpled piece of paper I shoved into my coat pocket was now worth $370 million. And the people who had spent my entire life making me feel completely worthless were currently trying to bash my front door off its hinges to steal it. My name is Sienna, and I am 28 years old. If you have ever been the black sheep of a family that only values status, money, and appearances, you will understand exactly what I went through. The crystal glasses clinked loudly in the massive dining room of my parents' Atlanta estate. My mother, Valerie, beamed with pride as my father, Terrence, tossed a heavy set of keys across the long mahogany table. My older sister, Brianna, shrieked. She caught the keys, her perfectly manicured hands shaking with excitement. Outside in the circular driveway sat a brand new matte black Range Rover with a massive red bow on the hood. My parents owned a highly lucrative medical supply chain, and they never missed an opportunity to display their wealth. Brianna was their ultimate trophy. Her husband Connor was a white private equity director who always looked down on anyone not meeting his financial standards. Connor raised his glass of imported champagne and offered a toast to black excellence and to my beautiful wife, who deserves nothing but the absolute best. My parents practically melted at his words. They lived for this exact image. The flawless upper-class family hosting the perfect holiday dinner. I sat quietly at the far end of the table, cutting my roasted vegetables and trying to remain invisible. But in my family, invisibility was never an option. My mother turned her attention to me. She slid a thin envelope across the polished wood of the dining table. "Now, Sienna," she began, her voice echoing in the room. "Your father and I did not know what to get you since you are still staring at spreadsheets all day." "I am a senior data analyst, Mom," I said softly, picking up the envelope. Inside was a $5 Mega Millions ticket. Brianna let out a sharp, mean laugh. "Well, since you refused to let Connor look over your little retirement fund, Mom and Dad figured a lottery ticket is your only real chance at making any actual money. Since you clearly are not climbing the corporate ladder anytime soon, you might need that $5 to pay off your student loans." I forced my face to remain neutral. My father let out a booming laugh. "It is just a joke, Sienna. We bought it at that little gas station right down the street from your apartment building. Who knows, maybe you will win $50 and you can finally upgrade that 10-year-old sedan parked out front. It is bringing down the property value of the neighborhood." Connor chuckled, taking another slow sip of his champagne. "Honestly, if she wins, she should give it back to you as a return on investment." I looked at the four of them sitting there in their expensive clothes, surrounded by luxury, finding endless entertainment in my perceived failures. I slipped the ticket into my pocket and stood up. "Thank you for dinner," I said quietly. I walked out the front door, leaving them to their perfect evening. I was used to being the punchline. 3 days later, I was sitting in my apartment, drinking coffee and watching the local news. The news anchor smiled brightly through the screen. "And for those of you feeling lucky, the sole-winning ticket for the record-breaking $370 million Mega Millions jackpot was sold right here in Atlanta at the Chevron station on 5th and Main." I froze. My coffee mug hovered halfway to my mouth. 5th and Main. That was the gas station right down the street from my apartment complex. The exact one my father had mentioned on Christmas night. My hands started to tremble. I set the mug down so hard, coffee sloshed over the rim. I rushed to pull the crumpled envelope from my coat pocket. The winning numbers flashed on the bright screen. 4, 17, 33, 46, 52, Megaball 9. I looked down at the cheap printed ticket in my palm. I read the first number. 4. My breath hit. 17. 33. My vision started to blur. 46. 52. Megaball 9. Every single number matched perfectly. I stared at the screen, then back at the ticket, then back at the screen again. I did not scream. I did not jump up and down or cry tears of joy. Instead, a heavy, terrifying silence settled over my entire body. I had $370 million sitting right in the palm of my hand. In an instant, my entire life was permanently altered. I was no longer the struggling data analyst. I was no longer the family disappointment. I possessed more wealth than my parents and Connor combined. And then my cell phone started ringing. It was Brianna. Her name flashed aggressively across the screen. I ignored it. 2 seconds later, my mother called. I declined it. Then my father called. Then Connor. Within 10 short minutes, I had accumulated 89 missed calls. Then the text message from my mother popped up, changing my shock into sheer panic. "We know it was you. You bought that ticket with our family money, so you better open this door right now, Sienna, or we are calling the police." They had watched the morning news. They knew the location. And they knew the exact ticket they bought as a cruel gag gift was the ultimate winner. Before I could even process the threat, a loud, violent pounding echoed through the hallway. "Bam, bam, bam! Sienna, open this door right now!" My father's voice boomed through the thin wood of my apartment door. He sounded frantic, out of breath, and completely unhinged. I backed away from the door, clutching the multi-million-dollar piece of paper against my chest. They were actually here. The people who had mocked me and treated me like garbage just 72 hours ago were now standing in my hallway, ready to tear my door down, to steal the very thing they used to humiliate me. By the time I looked at my phone screen, there were 89 missed calls and one terrifying text message from my mother, Valerie. It read, "We know it was you. You bought that ticket with our family money, so you better open this door right now, Sienna, or we are calling the police." Just 3 days earlier, I sat in absolute silence at my parents' custom dining table, watching them laugh as they handed my sister the keys to a luxury vehicle. My gift from them was a $5 lottery ticket tossed across the table like an afterthought, a cheap joke to mock my career. But the joke was entirely on them, because that crumpled piece of paper I shoved into my coat pocket was now worth $370 million. And the very people who spent my entire life making me feel worthless were currently standing in my hallway, ready to bash my front door off its hinges to steal it. "My name is Sienna, and I am 28 years old." The crystal glasses clinked loudly in the dining room of my parents' Atlanta estate. My mother beamed with pride as my father Terrence tossed a set of keys across the mahogany table. My older sister Brianna shrieked, catching the keys, her hands shaking with excitement. Outside sat a brand new matte black Range Rover. My parents owned a lucrative medical supply chain and never missed an opportunity to display their wealth. Brianna, a public relations director, was their ultimate trophy. Her husband, Connor, a white equity director, always looked down on anyone not meeting his financial standards. Connor raised his champagne and offered a smug toast to black excellence and to my beautiful wife, who deserves nothing but the absolute best. My parents practically melted at his words, living for this exact image. I sat quietly at the far end of the table, cutting my vegetables, trying to remain invisible. But in my family, invisibility was never an option. My mother turned her attention to me, sliding a thin paper envelope across the polished wood. "Now, Sienna," she began, "your father and I did not know what to get you, since you are still staring at spreadsheets all day." "I am a senior data analyst, Mom," I said softly, picking up the envelope. Inside was a single $5 Mega Millions ticket. Brianna let out a laugh. "Well, since you refuse to let Connor look over your retirement fund, Mom and Dad figured a lottery ticket is your only real chance at making any actual money. Since you clearly are not climbing the corporate ladder, you might need that $5 to pay off your student loans." I forced my face to remain neutral. My father let out a booming laugh. "It is just a joke, Sienna. We bought it at that gas station down the street from your apartment. Who knows, maybe you will win $50 and you can finally upgrade that 10-year-old sedan parked out front." Connor chuckled, taking another slow sip of his champagne. "Honestly, if she wins, she should give it back to you as a return on investment." I looked at the four of them sitting there, finding endless entertainment in my perceived failures. I slipped the ticket into my pocket and stood up. "Thank you for dinner," I said quietly, walking out the front door, leaving them to their perfect evening. 3 days later, I was sitting in my apartment, drinking black coffee and watching the morning news. The news anchor smiled brightly through the screen. And for those feeling lucky, the soul-winning ticket for the record, breaking $370 million Mega Millions jackpot was sold right here in Atlanta at the Chevron station on 5th and Main. I froze completely. My coffee mug hovered halfway to my mouth. 5th and Main. That was the gas station exactly 1 block down the street from my apartment complex. My hands started to tremble uncontrollably. I set the mug down on the counter so hard coffee sloshed over the rim. I rushed to the hallway and pulled the crumpled envelope from my coat pocket. The winning numbers flashed boldly on the bright television screen. 4-17-33-46-52 Megaball 9. I looked down at the cheap printed ticket resting in my sweating palm. I read the first number. 4. My breath hitched. 17, 33. My vision actually started to blur. 46, 52, Megaball 9. Every single number matched perfectly. I stared at the television screen, then back at the small piece of paper. I did not scream or cry tears of joy. Instead, a heavy, terrifying silence settled over my entire body. I had $370 million sitting right in the palm of my hand. In a single instant, my entire life was permanently altered. I was no longer the struggling data analyst they pitied. And then my cell phone started ringing. It was Brianna. Her name flashed aggressively across the glowing screen. I ignored it. 2 seconds later, my mother called. I declined it. Then my father called. Then Connor. Within 10 short minutes, I had accumulated exactly 89 missed calls. Then the text message from my mother popped up, changing my stunned shock into sheer panic. "We know it was you. You bought that ticket with our family money, so you better open this door right now, Sienna, or we are calling the police." They had watched the morning news. They knew the exact ticket they bought as a cruel gag gift was the ultimate winner. Before I could even begin to process the reality of their threat, a loud, violent pounding echoed through the hallway. "Bam, bam, bam! Sienna, open this door right now!" The voice of my father boomed through the thin wood of my apartment door. He sounded frantic, out of breath, and completely unhinged. I could hear Connor yelling in the background, demanding I surrender the asset. I backed away from the door, clutching the $1 million piece of paper tightly against my chest. The people who had mocked me and treated me like garbage just 72 hours ago were now standing in my hallway, ready to tear my door down to steal the very thing they used to humiliate me. The deadbolt rattled under the immense weight of my father throwing his shoulder against the painted wood. Before I could even reach out to turn the lock, the doorframe splintered and burst open with a deafening crack. Terrence stumbled into my small living area, his face flushed a deep, angry red. Right behind him came my mother Valerie, clutching her designer handbag like a weapon. Brianna pushed past them both, her eyes wildly scanning my modest apartment before locking onto me. Connor brought up the rear, casually smoothing the lapels of his tailored suit, as if breaking and entering was just another corporate acquisition strategy for his portfolio. I took another step back, clutching the winning ticket tightly to my chest. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I forced myself to stand tall in my own home. "Give it to us right now!" Sienna, my father demanded, holding out his large hand expectantly. He did not ask how I was doing. He did not congratulate me on the miracle that had just occurred. His eyes were completely consumed by a feverish kind of greed I had never seen in him before. "That ticket belongs to this family and you know it. Hand it over before things get ugly." I shook my head slowly, keeping my distance from his outstretched hand. "You bought this at a gas station and gave it to me as a joke, Dad. It was a Christmas gift. Once you hand someone a gift, it becomes their legal property." My mother let out a shrill gasp, stepping forward and pointing an accusing manicured finger at my face. "How dare you speak to your father with such blatant disrespect after everything we have provided for you? We paid for your food, your clothes, your entire upbringing. That $5 came from our joint checking account. Therefore, the return on that initial investment belongs strictly to us. You are simply the vessel holding it right now. Hand over the ticket before you make a mistake you will regret for the rest of your miserable life." The sheer audacity of her twisted logic left me momentarily speechless. They honestly believed that because they had given me the cheapest item they could find, out of pure spite, they were entitled to hundreds of millions of dollars. They wanted to reap the rewards of a miracle they only facilitated to cause me pain. Before I could tell them exactly where to go, Connor stepped smoothly between my parents and me. He raised his hands in a placating gesture, wearing that same condescending smirk he used to negotiate high-stakes deals. "Now let us all take a deep breath and look at this logically," he said, his voice dripping with fake professional sympathy. "Sienna, you have to understand where your parents are coming from right now. You are a data analyst. You look at small numbers all day, but you have absolutely no concept of how to manage massive wealth. $370 million is not just money, it is an institution. If you try to claim this alone, the taxes will destroy you. The media will hound you, and you will likely be bankrupt within 5 years, just like most lottery winners who lack basic financial literacy." He reached into his expensive leather briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of freshly printed legal documents. He tossed them onto my cheap coffee table. They landed with a heavy, authoritative thud. "Because I care about the well-being of this family," Connor continued, smoothing his silk tie. "I had my legal team draft this emergency asset transfer agreement on the drive over here. It is completely foolproof. You sign the ticket over to my private equity firm today. I will personally handle the complex claim process, protecting your anonymity from the press. We will place the funds into an irrevocable family trust. Terrence and Valerie will be the primary beneficiaries, allowing them to expand their medical supply business and retire in absolute luxury. Brianna and I will receive a standard management fee and our rightful share for securing the asset." I stared at the thick stack of papers, then looked up at his arrogant blue eyes, trying to process the magnitude of his scheme. "And what exactly happens to me in this highly generous scenario?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. Connor smiled broadly, as if he was doing me the greatest favor in the world. "You will be completely taken care of, Sienna. The trust will guarantee you a generous 10% allowance doled out in monthly installments. You will never have to worry about paying your rent or your student loans ever again. 10% is $37 million before taxes, which is far more money than you could ever dream of making at your little desk job. We are protecting you from yourself and ensuring the wealth stays where it belongs." The profound disrespect washed over me like a bucket of ice water. 10% of my own winning ticket. They wanted to steal 90% of my money, lock it in a trust, controlled by a white man who openly despised me, and put me on a monthly allowance like a disobedient child. I looked at the legal documents, then looked my brother-in-law straight in the eyes. "I am not signing a single thing, Connor. And you are out of your mind if you think I am handing over $350 million to a man who uses my family as a prop for his diversity quotas. Get your papers off my table and get out of my apartment." Brianna lost her absolute mind. She lunged forward, her perfectly styled hair flying wildly around her face. "You selfish little failure," she screamed, her voice echoing shrilly off the apartment walls. "You have always been jealous of me, and now you are trying to rob our parents to punish us for your own shortcomings. You sit in this pathetic tiny apartment complaining about your life, while Connor and I actually build a legacy. Mom and Dad deserve that money. They earned it. They bought the ticket. You are just a bitter, lonely woman trying to steal the retirement they worked decades to secure." She reached across the coffee table, trying to grab my arm, but I stepped back quickly, sliding the ticket safely into the back pocket of my jeans. "You have everything, Brianna," I replied, keeping my voice completely steady while she unraveled in front of me. "You have the $90,000 car, the huge house, the fancy husband. You got everything you ever wanted while I got the scraps. This ticket was a scrap. A joke you all laughed at. Well, I am keeping the scrap." My father took a menacing step forward, his fists clenched tightly at his sides, his chest heaving. "I will not ask you again, Sienna. Give me the ticket, or I will take it from you by force. I brought you into this world, and I will not let you destroy our family legacy out of pure spite. If you touch me, I will press charges for assault and home invasion," I warned, grabbing my cell phone from the kitchen counter. "There are cameras in the hallway. You broke my door frame. You are trespassing on my property." The room grew incredibly tense. My parents realized I was not the same quiet girl who used to take their abuse in silence. The money had not even hit my bank account yet, but it had already given me something they could never take away: leverage. I was no longer dependent on their approval. I no longer feared their harsh words or their social status. Connor realized that his corporate intimidation tactics and my parents' aggressive bullying were not going to work. His fake smile completely vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating stare. He slowly picked up the legal documents from the coffee table and placed them back into his briefcase, snapping the brass locks shut with a sharp click. "You are making a massive mistake, Sienna," he said softly, taking his cell phone out of his tailored suit pocket. "You think you are smart because you crunch numbers, but you have no idea how the real world works. People like me run the real world. We make the rules, and we certainly do not let people like you walk away with our assets." He tapped the screen of his phone, his eyes never leaving mine. A cruel, confident smirk spread across his face as he brought the device to his ear. I watched his reflection in the hallway mirror, wondering what manipulative business tactic he was planning to deploy next. But he did not call his lawyers. He did not call his financial advisors. Instead, Connor calmly spoke into the receiver. "Yes, hello, I have an emergency. I need police assistance immediately at an apartment complex on 5th and Main. I am reporting a grand larceny in progress. My sister-in-law has just stolen a highly valuable family asset worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and she is becoming extremely violent and unstable. We need officers here right now." He ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket, looking at me with absolute triumph. "The police are on their way," he announced proudly. "Let us see how well you handle a felony theft charge, little sister." The deadbolt rattled under the immense weight of my father throwing his shoulder against the painted wood. Before I could even reach out to turn the lock, the door frame splintered and burst open with a deafening crack. Terrence stumbled into my small living area, his face flushed a deep, angry red. Right behind him came my mother Valerie, clutching her designer handbag like a weapon. Brianna pushed past them both, her eyes wildly scanning my modest apartment before locking onto me. Connor brought up the rear, casually smoothing the lapels of his tailored suit, as if breaking and entering was just another corporate acquisition strategy for his portfolio. I took another step back, clutching the winning ticket tightly to my chest. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I forced myself to stand tall in my own home. "Give it to us right now," Sienna, my father, demanded, holding out his large hand expectantly. He did not ask how I was doing. He did not congratulate me on the miracle that had just occurred. His eyes were completely consumed by a feverish kind of greed I had never seen in him before. "That ticket belongs to this family and you know it. Hand it over before things get ugly." I shook my head slowly, keeping my distance from his outstretched hand. "You bought this at a gas station and gave it to me as a joke, Dad. It was a Christmas gift. Once you hand someone a gift, it becomes their legal property." My mother let out a shrill gasp, stepping forward and pointing an accusing manicured finger at my face. "How dare you speak to your father with such blatant disrespect after everything we have provided for you? We paid for your food, your clothes, your entire upbringing. That $5 came from our joint checking account. Therefore, the return on that initial investment belongs strictly to us. You are simply the vessel holding it right now. Hand over the ticket before you make a mistake you will regret for the rest of your miserable life." The sheer audacity of her twisted logic left me momentarily speechless. They honestly believed that because they had given me the cheapest item they could find, out of pure spite, they were entitled to hundreds of millions of dollars. They wanted to reap the rewards of a miracle they only facilitated to cause me pain. Before I could tell them exactly where to go, Connor stepped smoothly between my parents and me. He raised his hands in a placating gesture, wearing that same condescending smirk he used to negotiate high-stakes deals. "Now let us all take a deep breath and look at this logically," he said, his voice dripping with fake professional sympathy. "Sienna, you have to understand where your parents are coming from right now. You are a data analyst. You look at small numbers all day, but you have absolutely no concept of how to manage massive wealth. $370 million is not just money. It is an institution. If you try to claim this alone, the taxes will destroy you, the media will hound you, and you will likely be bankrupt within 5 years, just like most lottery winners who lack basic financial literacy." He reached into his expensive leather briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of freshly printed legal documents. He tossed them onto my cheap coffee table. They landed with a heavy, authoritative thud. "Because I care about the well-being of this family." Connor continued smoothing his silk tie. I had my legal team draft this emergency asset transfer agreement on the drive over here. It is completely foolproof. You sign the ticket over to my private equity firm today. I will personally handle the complex claim process, protecting your anonymity from the press. We will place the funds into an irrevocable family trust. Terrence and Valerie will be the primary beneficiaries, allowing them to expand their medical supply business and retire in absolute luxury. Brianna and I will receive a standard management fee and our rightful share for securing the asset. I stared at the thick stack of papers, then looked up at his arrogant blue eyes, trying to process the magnitude of his scheme. And what exactly happens to me in this highly generous scenario? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. Connor smiled broadly, as if he was doing me the greatest favor in the world. You will be completely taken care of, Sienna. The trust will guarantee you a generous 10% allowance doled out in monthly installments. You will never have to worry about paying your rent or your student loans ever again. 10% is $37 million before taxes, which is far more money than you could ever dream of making at your little desk job. We are protecting you from yourself and ensuring the wealth stays where it belongs. The profound disrespect washed over me like a bucket of ice water. 10% of my own winning ticket. They wanted to steal 90% of my money, lock it in a trust controlled by a white man who openly despised me and put me on a monthly allowance like a disobedient child. I looked at the legal documents, then looked my brother-in-law straight in the eyes. I am not signing a single thing, Connor. And you are out of your mind if you think I am handing over $1/3 billion to a man who uses my family as a prop for his diversity quotas. Get your papers off my table and get out of my apartment. Brianna lost her absolute mind. She lunged forward, her perfectly styled hair flying wildly around her face. You selfish little failure, she screamed, her voice echoing shrilly off the apartment walls. You have always been jealous of me, and now you are trying to rob our parents to punish us for your own shortcomings. You sit in this pathetic tiny apartment complaining about your life, while Connor and I actually build a legacy. Mom and Dad deserve that money. They earned it. They bought the ticket. You are just a bitter, lonely woman trying to steal the retirement they worked decades to secure. She reached across the coffee table, trying to grab my arm, but I stepped back quickly, sliding the ticket safely into the back pocket of my jeans. You have everything, Brianna, I replied, keeping my voice completely steady, while she unraveled in front of me. You have the $90,000 car, the huge house, the fancy husband. You got everything you ever wanted while I got the scraps. This ticket was a scrap, a joke you all laughed at. Well, I am keeping the scrap. My father took a menacing step forward, his fists clenched tightly at his sides, his chest heaving. I will not ask you again, Sienna. Give me the ticket or I will take it from you by force. I brought you into this world, and I will not let you destroy our family legacy out of pure spite. If you touch me, I will press charges for assault and home invasion, I warned, grabbing my cell phone from the kitchen counter. There are cameras in the hallway. You broke my door frame. You are trespassing on my property. The room grew incredibly tense. My parents realized I was not the same quiet girl who used to take their abuse in silence. The money had not even hit my bank account yet, but it had already given me something they could never take away. Leverage. I was no longer dependent on their approval. I no longer feared their harsh words or their social status. Connor realized that his corporate intimidation tactics and my parents' aggressive bullying were not going to work. His fake smile completely vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating stare. He slowly picked up the legal documents from the coffee table and placed them back into his briefcase, snapping the brass locks shut with a sharp click. You are making a massive mistake, Sienna, he said softly, taking his cell phone out of his tailored suit pocket. You think you are smart because you crunch numbers, but you have no idea how the real world works. People like me run the real world. We make the rules, and we certainly do not let people like you walk away with our assets. He tapped the screen of his phone, his eyes never leaving mine. A cruel, confident smirk spread across his face as he brought the device to his ear. I watched his reflection in the hallway mirror, wondering what manipulative business tactic he was planning to deploy next. But he did not call his lawyers. He did not call his financial advisors. Instead, Connor calmly spoke into the receiver. Yes, hello, I have an emergency. I need police assistance immediately at an apartment complex on 5th and Main. I am reporting a grand larceny in progress. My sister-in-law has just stolen a highly valuable family asset worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and she is becoming extremely violent and unstable. We need officers here right now. He ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket, looking at me with absolute triumph. The police are on their way, he announced proudly. Let us see how well you handle a felony theft charge, little sister. The heavy silence in my living room was only broken by the sound of my father breathing heavily. Connor leaned against my kitchen counter, crossing his arms over his expensive suit. He looked entirely too comfortable in my space. Brianna pulled out her phone and began typing furiously, probably alerting her PR team or preparing some twisted narrative for her followers. My mother simply glared at me, her eyes tracing the outline of my cheap furniture with absolute disgust. They all thought they had me cornered. They believed the arrival of law enforcement would force me into submission because people like them always use the police to intimidate people like me. I did not panic. I did not beg them to cancel the call. I simply reached into my back pocket and pulled out my own cell phone. My hands were remarkably steady now. The initial shock of the lottery win and the violent home invasion had completely burned away, leaving behind a cold, sharp focus. I opened the social media app and scrolled directly to my sister's profile. Brianna documented every single second of her luxurious life for her followers. She never missed a chance to show off her wealth or humiliate me for engagement. I knew exactly what I was looking for. I scrolled past the photos of her new car and found the live broadcast she had saved from Christmas dinner. I muted the volume and let the video load, just as the distinct wail of police sirens pierced the quiet morning air outside my window. Red and blue lights flashed against my living room walls. Connor stood up straight, adjusting his cuffs. He gave me one final look of absolute disdain before walking toward my broken front door to greet the officers. Two uniformed police officers stepped cautiously over the splintered wood of my doorframe. They looked around the small apartment, taking in the sight of my wealthy, impeccably dressed family standing over me. Connor immediately took control of the narrative, using his deep, authoritative corporate voice. Officers, thank you for arriving so quickly. He began stepping forward to shake their hands. I am Connor, a private equity director, and this is my father-in-law, Terrence, owner of a major medical supply firm. We are dealing with a severe family crisis. The woman standing over there is my sister-in-law, Sienna. She is having a mental breakdown and has stolen a highly valuable financial asset belonging to this family. We simply want the asset returned to us peacefully, but she became aggressive and broke her own door to make it look like we attacked her. The sheer level of manipulation was staggering. Connor lied with such effortless precision that the officers immediately turned their attention to me, with hands resting near their utility belts. My father stepped up right beside Connor, nodding solemnly. It is true, officers, my father added, his voice dripping with fake paternal concern. I purchased a lottery ticket with my own money. She discovered it was a winning ticket and snatched it from my home this morning. She is refusing to return my property. We do not want to press criminal charges if she just hands it back right now. Brianna started forcing fake tears, sobbing quietly into her hands, while my mother rubbed her back. The officers looked at the broken door frame, then looked at me. One of them stepped forward, asking for my identification and demanding to know if I had stolen property in my possession. I did not raise my voice. I did not act frantic or defensive. I calmly handed the officer my driver's license and held up my cell phone. Officers, I am the legal tenant of this apartment, I said clearly. These four individuals kicked my door in less than 20 minutes ago to steal a lottery ticket I received as a gift. The man who just spoke to you lied. I did not steal anything from his home, and I can prove it right now. I tapped the screen of my phone and turned the volume all the way up. The video of our Christmas dinner played loudly for everyone in the room to hear. Brianna was holding her phone recording my parents. The audio was crystal clear. My mother slid the envelope across the table. Then my father spoke on the video, his booming voice echoing in my small apartment. It is just a joke, Sienna. We bought it at that gas station down the street from your apartment. The video continued playing, showing Connor laughing and mocking my career. It showed my father explicitly stating the ticket was a gift bought for me. I paused the video and looked at the two police officers. As you can see and hear, that ticket was a Christmas gift given to me 3 days ago, I explained calmly. I checked the numbers this morning and realized it is a winning ticket. My family saw the news, realized the ticket they gave me won, and broke into my home to take it back by force. The officers exchanged a long look. The tension in the room shifted entirely. The older officer turned to Connor and my father, his expression hardening. Sir, based on this video footage, this is a conditional gift and entirely a civil matter, the officer stated firmly. She did not steal anything from your home. You cannot use the police department to forcibly reclaim a gift just because it suddenly gained value. Furthermore, you broke down her door and entered her residence without permission. That is trespassing and destruction of property. Connor lost his smug smile. His face turned a dangerous shade of pale. You do not understand, officer, he argued, his voice rising in panic. That asset is worth hundreds of millions of dollars. You cannot just let her keep it based on a technicality. We will sue her into oblivion. You are welcome to take it to civil court, the officer replied sharply. But right now you all need to vacate these premises immediately, or I will arrest every single one of you for trespassing and property damage. Step out into the hallway now. My mother gasped, clutching her chest as if she had been physically struck. Brianna stopped her fake crying and glared at the officers in pure disbelief. They were not used to being told no. They were not used to authority figures refusing to bow to their wealth and status. The officers pointed toward the hallway, leaving them absolutely no choice but to comply. As they shuffled out of my apartment, my father stopped at the broken threshold. His eyes were burning with a hatred so deep it made my skin crawl. He realized physical force and police intimidation had failed, so he decided to use the only leverage he had left. You think you have won, Sienna? He growled, his voice dropping to a low, menacing timbre. You think you can humiliate this family and get away with it. You seem to forget who owns the very ground you are standing on. My real estate holding company owns this entire apartment complex. I am your landlord, and you have just become a massive liability to my property. He pointed his finger directly at my chest. Your lease is officially terminated, effective immediately. I want you and all your cheap trash out of my building in exactly 24 hours. If you are still here tomorrow morning, I will have a crew come in and throw everything you own into a dumpster. You are no longer my daughter, and you are no longer welcome on my property. Valerie nodded in agreement, her lips pressed into a tight, furious line. You are dead to us, she spat out before turning on her heel and marching down the hallway. The police officers watched them leave before asking if I needed to file a formal report for the door. I told them I just wanted to be left alone. Once the officers finally exited the building, I was left standing in the middle of my wrecked living room. The cold winter air blew through the shattered doorframe. I was officially homeless. My own parents had just thrown me out onto the street with zero notice. I had absolutely nowhere to go, and my next paycheck was not due for another week. But as I walked into my small bedroom and pulled my dusty suitcase from the closet, a slow smile spread across my face. I was packing my bags with no home to go to, but I was walking out of that apartment holding a multi-million-dollar ticket. The crisp morning air of downtown Atlanta offered no comfort as I walked through the revolving glass doors of my corporate office building. I carried my usual briefcase, hoping the familiar routine of my senior data analyst position would ground me. The blind trust was officially in motion, but the State Lottery Commission required a mandatory processing period before transferring a single cent of the $370 million. Until that money cleared, I still needed my paycheck. I swiped my employee identification card at the security turnstile. The light flashed a harsh red and the glass barrier remained locked in place. I tried again, assuming it was a simple glitch, but a heavy hand fell on my shoulder. It was one of the building security guards asking me to step aside. Before I could even ask what was going on, my department director walked out into the lobby. His name was Gregory Patterson, and he was not just my boss. How was my father Terrence's longtime golf partner at the country club? Gregory did not offer his usual morning greeting. He looked at me with a mixture of pity and severe disapproval, gesturing for me to follow him into a small, vacant conference room near the reception desk. I sat down in a leather chair, feeling the temperature in the room drop as he remained standing. He placed a manila folder on the table between us. Sienna, we are letting you go effective immediately, he said, his voice completely devoid of any professional warmth. Your personal items have already been packed into a box and will be shipped to whatever address you provide. I stared at the folder, my mind struggling to process the sudden termination. My performance reviews were flawless. I had just saved the firm thousands of dollars with my last data projection model. I asked him on what grounds I was being fired. Gregory sighed heavily, adjusting his expensive silk tie. Terrence called me late last night, he explained, crossing his arms. He told me about the disturbing situation happening within your family. He also sent me the link to your sister Brianna's social media broadcast. That video already has hundreds of thousands of views, Sienna. You are being publicly accused of stealing your parents' retirement assets and behaving erratically. Our firm handles sensitive data for high-net-worth clients. We simply cannot have an employee involved in a highly publicized financial scandal. It is a massive liability. We are terminating your employment to protect the firm's reputation. How was lying? This had absolutely nothing to do with company policy or corporate liability. This was a targeted hit, orchestrated by my father to cut off my only source of independent income. Terrence knew exactly how long the lottery payout process would take, and he was systematically destroying my ability to survive the waiting period. I stood up from the chair, refusing to give Gregory the satisfaction of seeing me sweat. You are firing your best analyst because your golf buddy asked you to, I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. I hope Terrence promised you a good return on this favor, Gregory, because you are going to need it when I am finished. I walked out of the building with absolutely nothing. No job, no apartment, and no access to the hundreds of millions of dollars that rightfully belonged to me. The cold reality of my situation pressed down on my shoulders as I navigated the busy Atlanta sidewalks. I took a bus back to the cheap motel on the outskirts of the city where I had been staying since my father illegally evicted me from my apartment. The peeling wallpaper and stained carpets of the motel room felt like a prison cell. I sat on the edge of the sagging mattress, pulling out my laptop to calculate exactly how much money I had left in my checking account to survive the next few weeks. Before I could even open my banking application, a loud series of knocks rattled my motel room door. I approached cautiously, peering through the cloudy peephole. A man in a plain gray suit stood in the exterior corridor holding a clipboard. I opened the door just a fraction, keeping the security chain engaged. Are you Sienna? He asked, looking at a piece of paper. When I confirmed my identity, he shoved a thick stack of legal documents through the narrow gap in the door. You have been served, he announced, turning on his heel and walking away without another word. I carried the heavy stack of papers to the small motel desk and began reading through the dense legal jargon. The plaintiff listed on the front page was my brother-in-law Connor, acting on behalf of my parents. My blood boiled as I read the details of the filing. Connor had officially filed an emergency injunction in the county superior court, demanding an immediate freeze on the Mega Millions lottery payout. His legal team had crafted a highly deceptive narrative, claiming the winning ticket was a disputed shared family asset purchased jointly through a family pool. He attached sworn affidavits from Terrence Valerie and Brianna, all committing blatant perjury, by stating they had contributed cash to buy the ticket together with the explicit verbal agreement that any winnings would be split equally among the five of us. The legal strategy was viciously brilliant. Connor knew the injunction would not hold up permanently in court, especially with the video evidence I possessed showing the ticket was a clear individual gift. But winning the lawsuit was not his actual goal. His goal was to freeze the payout process, entirely dragging the dispute into a prolonged legal battle that could easily take months or even years to resolve. He wanted to starve me out. He knew I had just lost my job and my home. He assumed that without any income or resources, I would eventually buckle under the financial pressure and sign his original settlement agreement just to survive. I tossed the injunction onto the bed, feeling a sharp knot of anxiety forming in my stomach. The sun was beginning to set, and I had not eaten anything since a cheap cup of coffee that morning. I grabbed my purse and walked 2 blocks down the crumbling sidewalk to a rundown convenience store. I gathered a loaf of bread, a jar of peanut butter, and a few bottles of water, bringing the meager items to the cash register. The total came out to $14. I pulled out my primary debit card and swiped it through the card reader. The machine beeped loudly, displaying a bright red declined message on the small screen. I frowned, apologizing to the cashier, and wiped the magnetic strip on my shirt, assuming it was a simple reading error. I swiped the card a second time. It declined again. A cold sweat broke out across the back of my neck. I pulled out my backup credit card, the one I kept strictly for emergencies, and inserted the chip. The machine processed for a few agonizing seconds before loudly rejecting that card as well. The cashier looked at me with an impatient sigh. "You got another way to pay, lady, because there is a line forming behind you." I left the groceries on the counter and practically ran out of the store, pulling my cell phone from my pocket. I immediately dialed the customer service number on the back of my primary bank card. After navigating the automated menu, a representative finally answered the line. I asked them why my card was declining when I knew I had several $1,000s sitting in my checking account. The representative placed me on a brief hold. When she returned, her voice was clipped and professional. "Ma, I am looking at your profile right now," she explained. "Your checking and savings accounts have been placed under a comprehensive administrative freeze. There is a flag on your profile indicating suspicious activity related to potential fraud and asset mismanagement. This freeze was initiated by the Wealth Management Division, affiliated with our banking institution." My breath caught in my throat as the pieces fell into place. Connor, his private equity firm and his high-level connections in the banking sector gave him the leverage to flag my personal accounts under the guise of an ongoing financial investigation related to the lottery injunction. He had not just tried to stop my winnings from being paid out. He had reached into my personal life and completely severed my access to my own hard-earned savings. I ended the call standing alone under a flickering street lamp on a dangerous corner of the city. I was holding a ticket worth $370 million. But thanks to the calculated cruelty of my own family, I did not even have $14 to buy a loaf of bread. I stood under that flickering street lamp, clutching my empty pockets while the cold, terrifying reality of my situation washed over me. Connor truly thought he had backed me into a completely inescapable corner. He arrogantly assumed taking my job, my home, and my meager savings would eventually force me to crawl back to my family and surrender my $370 million ticket. He fundamentally underestimated my fierce will to survive. The State Lottery Commission had already authenticated my winning ticket a few days prior, verifying my identity and securely locking the asset into the mandatory processing period for the blind trust I established. I did not have access to the full payout yet, but I possessed the most powerful collateral in the entire state of Georgia. I did not return to the cheap motel that night. Instead, I waited for the sun to rise and walked directly into the financial district of downtown Atlanta. I completely bypassed the traditional banking institutions where my father and brother-in-law held their elite influence and significant social power. I walked into the lobby of a specialty lending firm, known for servicing high-net-worth individuals requiring immediate unrecorded capital. These lenders did not care about credit scores or family drama. They only cared about verified assets, and they charged exorbitant interest rates for their absolute discretion. I sat across a heavy glass desk from a senior loan director and handed him my notarized validation documents from the State Lottery Commission. He spent 20 minutes verifying the authentication codes with state officials. Less than 2 hours later, I walked out of that glass building with a short-term cash advance of $2 million securely wired into a brand new offshore account that Connor could never trace or freeze. I did not use that money to buy a luxury car or a mansion. I used it to buy a weapon. I hailed a cab and directed the driver to the tallest commercial skyscraper in the city, heading to a firm known as the most ruthless corporate litigation team in the entire state. These were not the kind of lawyers who sent polite negotiation letters. They were apex predators who specialized in dismantling hostile corporate takeovers, uncovering hidden offshore assets, and crushing their opponents into absolute dust in the courtroom. I walked straight into their pristine marble reception area and demanded an immediate meeting with a senior partner. I bypassed their initial hesitation and their fully booked schedule by instantly wiring a $500,000 retainer fee directly into their corporate trust account. Within 10 minutes, I was sitting in a corner office overlooking the Atlanta skyline. My lead attorney was a fierce, brilliant woman named Cassandra, who wore a sharp-tailored suit and possessed a gaze that could cut through solid steel. I did not cry or ask for pity. I laid out the entire situation with absolute clinical precision. I explained the fake legal injunction, the illegal freezing of my personal bank accounts, the violent home invasion, and the coordinated termination of my employment orchestrated by my father. Cassandra did not offer me warm, sympathetic platitudes. She offered me a highly tactical war plan. We struck back with overwhelming and devastating legal force. Within 48 hours, Cassandra and her heavy-hitting litigation team dragged Connor and his corporate lawyers into an emergency superior court hearing. The judge took exactly one look at the clear video evidence from our Christmas dinner, showing my father explicitly stating the ticket was a singular gift. He then reviewed the sworn affidavits submitted by my family, claiming they had pooled their cash to buy the ticket together. The judge was absolutely furious. He did not just shatter the emergency injunction Connor filed, he issued severe judicial sanctions against his legal team for intentionally filing fraudulent motions and committing blatant perjury. My personal banking accounts were officially unfrozen by noon that exact same day. I transferred every single cent out of the institution immediately and formally reported the bank managers to the Federal Financial Regulatory Board for actively participating in an illegal administrative freeze without a valid court order. I wanted to make sure Connor lost every single favor he had ever called in. The massive payout process for the $370 million resumed immediately without any further legal hurdles or delays. But my family had made a fatal strategic error by initiating a formal civil lawsuit against me in the first place. By legally suing me for a shared portion of the lottery ticket, they had permanently and legally opened themselves up to the mandatory asset discovery phase of the trial. Cassandra used this legal opening to launch a full-scale investigation into their lives. She requested comprehensive financial disclosures from Terrence, Valerie, Brianna, and Connor to determine the exact nature of their supposed joint family funds. I spent my days sitting in the polished conference room, drinking sparkling water, and watching a team of elite forensic accountants rip through my family's entire financial history. They tracked every single bank account, every mortgage document, every business ledger, and every corporate tax filing connected to the four of them. They were simply looking for evidence to completely bury the family lawsuit and secure my winnings. But what those accountants actually found buried deep within the corporate spreadsheets was infinitely more valuable than a court victory. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon when Cassandra walked into the quiet conference room. She bypassed her usual professional pleasantries and sat directly across from me. She held a thick red manila folder in her hands. Her eyes held a mixture of deep satisfaction and predatory anticipation. She placed the heavy folder on the polished mahogany table and slid it carefully across the surface until it rested right in front of my hands. I looked down at the bold printed labels covering the front of the highly confidential documents. "Sienna, your brother-in-law firm is completely insolvent," she announced, her voice echoing slightly in the large, quiet room. We followed the complex money trail from his private equity accounts, and the numbers simply do not lie. He does not have a single dime to his name. The luxury cars, the custom suits, the extravagant dinners, the exclusive country club memberships. It is all a massive, terrifying illusion built entirely on high-interest predatory loans. He has been moving invisible money around for years to maintain his social status. He is flat broke. I pulled the first stack of financial statements from the heavy red folder Cassandra had just pushed across the polished mahogany table. As a data analyst, I spent my entire professional life decoding complex numerical patterns, finding the hidden truth buried beneath layers of carefully constructed spreadsheets. But the financial devastation printed on the pages sitting right in front of me did not require any advanced algorithms to decipher. It was a complete and absolute bloodbath. Connor had spent years projecting the image of an elite private equity director parading around Atlanta in custom-tailored suits and sneering at anyone who did not meet his exacting financial standards. He loved to lecture me about wealth management and fiscal responsibility. Yet the highly confidential banking records spread across the conference table revealed a man who was drowning in a catastrophic ocean of high-interest debt. Cassandra tapped a manicured finger against a specific vehicle financing contract near the top of the pile. "Let us start with that spectacular Christmas gift," she said, her voice sharp and steady. "Your brother-in-law did not purchase that $90,000 matte black Range Rover with cash. He did not even use a standard traditional auto loan. He financed that vehicle through a predatory subprime lending agency at a staggering 29% interest rate. To make the down payment, he actually rolled over $20,000 of negative equity from your sister's previous luxury vehicle into the new contract. They are paying over $2,000 a month just to keep that car in their driveway, and they are currently 2 months behind on the payments." The dealership had already issued a final warning notice before initiating formal repossession protocols. The gift they had flaunted in my face to prove their superiority was literally days away from being towed out of their circular driveway. I stared at the financing contract, feeling a massive wave of vindication wash over me. My parents had stood in their grand dining room, beaming with absolute pride while Connor handed Brianna those keys. They had mocked my $5 lottery ticket while praising a man who was literally financing their fake black excellence through a loan shark. But the revelations regarding my golden child sister were equally pathetic. I pulled up the corporate tax filings for Brianna and her supposed elite public relations firm. The company had not turned a single cent of actual profit in over 3 years. Cassandra handed me another stack of papers detailing my sister's personal spending habits. "Brianna has been actively using her business credit lines to fund her personal lifestyle," Cassandra explained, sliding the highlighted statements toward me. "The designer bags, the luxury vacations to Dubai, the expensive champagne dinners you see on her social media feed, they are all entirely funded by maxed-out corporate credit cards. She is floating minimum monthly payments across 7 different lending institutions just to keep up appearances for her online followers. Her flawless life is nothing but a carefully curated digital illusion built entirely on a mountain of unsecured debt." The sheer hypocrisy of it all was almost suffocating. Brianna had stood in my living room screaming that I was a selfish failure who wanted to steal our parents' retirement. She had gone on social media crying to hundreds of thousands of strangers, painting me as a greedy villain who did not know how to work for a living. Meanwhile, she was actively bankrupting herself just to maintain the fake persona of a wealthy, successful executive. But the absolute worst discovery was buried at the very bottom of the red folder. It was a commercial real estate bridge loan originated about 14 months ago. I read through the guarantor signatures on the commercial loan, and my breath completely caught in my throat. Connor had not just ruined his own finances, he had dragged my parents right down into the abyss with him. I looked up at Cassandra, my eyes wide with disbelief. "Did he actually leverage my parents' estate?" I asked, my voice dropping to a shocked whisper. Cassandra nodded, her expression turning incredibly grim. "He did much more than that, Sienna. When Connor realized his private equity firm was burning through capital and facing total insolvency, he went to your father for a bailout. He used his corporate charm and his status as the perfect white son-in-law to convince Terrence to cross-collateralize both the family mansion and the primary warehouse for their medical supply chain business. Your father signed the paperwork, making himself the primary guarantor on a massive commercial bridge loan to save Connor from bankruptcy. Terrence truly believed he was making a brilliant, secure investment in a financial genius. Instead, he legally tied every single asset your parents own directly to a sinking ship." I sat back in the heavy leather chair, feeling slightly dizzy. My parents were so completely blinded by their desperate need to maintain their upper-class social status that they handed the keys to their entire kingdom to a con artist. They had given Connor complete control over their medical supply business and their sprawling luxury home just so they could continue bragging to their country club friends about their wealthy son-in-law. They were perfectly willing to throw me out onto the street and leave me homeless, but they had eagerly signed away their own life work to a man who was actively destroying them. "They are all going to lose everything," I said, quietly staring at the signatures on the bottom of the commercial loan document. "The house, the business, the cars. It is all going to collapse." Cassandra leaned forward, resting her elbows on the polished wood of the conference table. Her eyes gleamed with a highly calculated predatory light. "They are going to lose it very soon, Sienna. We dug into the specific financial institution holding the paper for this massive commercial bridge loan. It is a boutique lending firm called Atlas Private Wealth. Because Connor has missed 4 consecutive monthly payments on the multi-million-dollar loan, Atlas has officially classified the entire debt portfolio as toxic. They are a highly aggressive firm, and they do not like holding non-performing assets on their books. Cassandra slid one final document across the table, tapping the prominent logo of the private wealth bank. They are currently looking to offload this bad loan to a third-party debt buyer for pennies on the dollar. She explained, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across her face. They want to sell the debt immediately to recoup their initial losses, which means whoever buys this debt portfolio from Atlas Private Wealth will instantly become the primary lien holder on your parents' mansion, their medical supply business, and your sister's predatory car loan. They will hold the absolute power to foreclose on the entire family and completely dismantle their fake empire overnight. I sat staring at the logo of Atlas Private Wealth printed on the documents. The silence in the conference room was absolute. Cassandra watched me closely, waiting for my analytical mind to process the monumental opportunities she had just laid out on the mahogany table. If Atlas was looking to offload the toxic debt portfolio generated by Connor and my parents, they would sell it to the first buyer who brought clean cash to the table. I did not want to just win a civil lawsuit anymore. I wanted to completely dismantle the arrogant hierarchy that had crushed my spirit for 28 years. Before I could verbalize the strategy forming in my mind, my cell phone vibrated against the wood surface. I picked up the device and opened the encrypted secure messaging application connected directly to my blind trust. The State Lottery Commission had officially concluded their mandatory processing period. The final wire transfer had cleared. $370 million was sitting securely in my fully protected offshore accounts. I looked up from the glowing screen and met Cassandra directly in her sharp, predatory eyes. I do not want to just freeze their assets or drag this out in court, I said, my voice dropping to a low, steady timbre. I want to be the third-party debt buyer. I want to purchase the entire toxic portfolio from Atlas Private Wealth today. Cassandra leaned back in her chair, a slow, genuine smile transforming her stern features. She never asked if I had the capital. She simply pulled a fresh yellow legal pad from her briefcase and grabbed a heavy gold pen. To do this without Connor or your father finding out, we cannot use your name or your primary trust, she explained, writing rapidly on the lined paper. We will register a holding company through an anonymous agent in Delaware to act as a corporate ghost. Atlas Private Wealth will only see a faceless investment group stepping up to buy their bad paper. Connor and Terrence will only receive a formal notification that their debt has been reassigned to a new corporate entity. They will have no idea their discarded daughter is holding the reins. I told her to initiate the incorporation process immediately. I authorized my financial managers to release $20 million of liquid capital to fund the shadow acquisition. My legal team moved with terrifying speed and absolute precision. Within 48 hours, the Shadow Corporation was fully incorporated and legally recognized under a deliberately boring and generic name. Cassandra and her senior partners reached out to the executives at Atlas Private Wealth, acting as anonymous corporate brokers. Atlas was bleeding money because of Connor and his failed private equity firm. They were incredibly eager to scrub the non-performing loans off their quarterly financial reports. They did not ask any questions about the anonymous buyer bringing straight cash to the negotiation table. They simply wanted the massive liability gone before their own shareholders noticed the deficit. The negotiations took less than 3 days. Atlas Private Wealth was so desperate to mitigate their losses, they agreed to sell the entire debt portfolio for pennies on the dollar. My newly formed Shadow Corporation purchased the commercial bridge loan tied to my parents' sprawling medical supply business. We bought the primary mortgage on their massive luxury mansion. We even acquired the predatory subprime financing contract for the matte black Range Rover they had so proudly paraded around on Christmas night. I sat alone in the quiet conference room, signing my signature on the final transfer documents. I did not feel any guilt or hesitation as my pen moved across the thick paper. I was simply executing a flawless corporate acquisition. Terrence and Valerie had eagerly signed away their entire life work to a manipulative white son-in-law, just to maintain their fake social status. They had prioritized keeping up appearances over protecting their own flesh and blood. Now I legally own their business, their home, and their beloved vehicles. I possess the absolute unilateral power to issue immediate notices of default and initiate aggressive foreclosure proceedings on my entire family. I organized the finalized legal deeds into a neat stack and placed them securely inside my briefcase. I was preparing to instruct Cassandra to unleash the first wave of brutal default notices when my cell phone chimed loudly with a social media alert. I had kept a generic anonymous account active specifically to monitor Brianna and her digital illusions. I opened the application and watched a brand new live broadcast populate on the screen. Brianna was sitting on the plush white sofa inside her living room, wearing no makeup and an oversized gray sweater designed to make her look incredibly fragile and vulnerable. She was staring into the camera lens with perfectly manufactured tears streaming down her carefully illuminated face. She looked absolutely devastated, but I knew her PR tactics too well. I have something deeply personal to share with my followers today, Brianna whispered, her voice trembling with calculated emotional weight. She paused to wipe a fake tear from her cheek, holding up a small plastic medical wand to the camera lens. It was a positive pregnancy test. I just found out Connor and I are expecting our first child, she sobbed, clutching the plastic stick to her chest. This should be the happiest moment of my entire life, but instead I am living in a total nightmare. My sister Sienna is still trying to destroy our family with her greedy lawsuits. She is trying to steal the money my parents need for their retirement, and now the intense legal stress is putting my unborn baby at severe medical risk. I am begging you, Sienna, if you are watching this, please stop attacking us. Do the right thing and drop this horrible legal battle for the sake of your future niece or nephew. Please do not let your bitter jealousy harm an innocent child. The broadcast ended, leaving me staring at the dark screen, while pure revulsion twisted in my gut. Brianna was using a fake pregnancy to trap me and turn the entire city against me. I sat in the quiet conference room, letting the sheer audacity of my sister's performance wash over me. She had weaponized the concept of motherhood just to manipulate public sympathy and paint me as a monster. Cassandra watched the video replay on her tablet, her professional demeanor remaining entirely unbroken. She noted that desperate people always make massive tactical errors when they feel their control slipping away. Brianna did not actually have access to any real medical documentation to prove her condition. She was simply buying time, hoping the public backlash would force me to surrender my assets before the truth came out. Less than 12 hours after the social media broadcast, my newly purchased cell phone vibrated on the glass desk. It was an email from my father, Terrence, sent directly to my legal team and forwarded to my personal inbox. He was formally inviting me to a private reconciliation dinner at the most exclusive high-end steakhouse in the affluent Buckhead district of Atlanta. The message was filled with flowery language about putting family first, healing old wounds, and coming together for the sake of the new innocent life entering our world. They wanted to use the unborn baby as the ultimate emotional leverage to force a settlement. Cassandra advised me to accept the invitation. She knew they were running completely out of options and capital. She handed me a sleek digital watch to wear on my wrist, explaining that the state of Georgia operated under a one-party consent law for recording conversations. I only needed my own permission to document every single word they said during this supposed peace dinner. I strapped the device to my wrist, feeling a cold sense of anticipation settling deep within my chest. I was walking directly into the lion's den, but I was the one holding the absolute power to destroy them all. I arrived at the restaurant wearing a simple dark dress, deliberately downplaying my newly acquired wealth. The host guided me to a private dining room situated at the very back of the opulent establishment. The heavy oak doors swung open to reveal my entire family, seated around a circular table. Terrence wore his finest tailored suit, looking every bit the proud patriarch, while Valerie dabbed her eyes with a cloth napkin, pretending to be overcome with maternal emotion at the sight of me. Brianna sat next to Connor, holding her completely flat stomach, with both hands, playing the role of the protective, expectant mother. Connor looked incredibly strained, his usual arrogant smirk replaced by tight, forced pleasantries. I took the empty seat directly across from my father. They did not order food. They did not ask how I was coping with the loss of my job or my home. Terrence immediately folded his hands on the white tablecloth and shifted into his aggressive corporate negotiation stance. He told me that the stress of the ongoing legal battle was actively threatening the health of my sister and her unborn child. He claimed the doctors had placed Brianna on strict bed rest and warned that any further emotional trauma could result in a catastrophic medical emergency. Valerie reached across the table attempting to grab my hand, but I smoothly pulled it away. She let out a dramatic sob, begging me to look at the bigger picture. She said the money was tearing our beautiful family apart, and that we needed to return to the loving dynamic we once shared. She completely ignored the fact that they had violently broken down my apartment door and thrown me onto the street just weeks prior. They were rewriting history in real time, expecting me to fall back into my designated role as the submissive scapegoat. Connor reached into his leather briefcase, the exact same one he had brought to my apartment during the home invasion. He pulled out a fresh stack of legal documents and slid them precisely to the center of the table. He explained that his legal team had drafted a compromise that would ensure the safety of the baby and restore peace to the family. They were demanding that I sign over exactly 50% of my lottery winnings into a brand new irrevocable trust fund. This specific trust would be designated entirely for the care, education, and future legacy of Brianna and her child. Connor would naturally act as the primary financial trustee, overseeing the disbursement of the hundreds of millions of dollars. My father leaned forward, his voice dropping to a low, menacing timbre. He told me that if I refused to sign the documents right now, they would unleash a massive media campaign across every major news network in the country. They would publicly accuse me of intentionally endangering a high-risk pregnancy out of pure spite and greed. He threatened to drag the civil lawsuit all the way to the Supreme Court, tying up my assets in endless litigation until the legal fees completely drained my resources. They were using the phantom baby as a shield and a weapon, simultaneously trying to extort half of my wealth through sheer psychological terror. I knew exactly what I needed to do. I let my shoulders slump forward, intentionally breaking my posture to project total defeat. I forced my breathing to become shallow and rapid, mimicking the early stages of a panic attack. I looked down at the white tablecloth, letting a single tear fall from my eye. I told them the pressure was simply too much and I just wanted my family back. I whispered that I could not bear the thought of harming my future niece or nephew, and that I was willing to do whatever it took to make the nightmare end. Brianna let out a loud sigh of relief, instantly dropping her fragile mother routine. A greedy, victorious smile spread across her face as she looked at Connor. My parents visibly relaxed, assuming their coordinated emotional abuse had successfully broken my spirit one final time. I told them I needed just a few minutes to compose myself and review the paperwork in private before signing my life away. I stood up on shaky legs, excusing myself to use the restaurant restroom to wash my face and calm my nerves. I walked out of the private dining room, leaving them to quietly celebrate their supposed victory. The main hallway of the restaurant was lined with thick acoustic paneling and dim ambient lighting, providing absolute privacy for the elite clientele. I made my way toward the restrooms, but my footsteps slowed as I heard a familiar voice echoing from a secluded alcove near the emergency exit. It was Connor. He had slipped out of the private room through a side door just moments after I left. I pressed my back against the textured wall, holding my breath, and activating the recording application on my digital watch. Connor was pacing frantically back and forth in the narrow space, gripping his cell phone tightly against his ear. His voice was frantic, desperate, and completely stripped of his usual corporate arrogance. I was not talking to his lawyers or his wealth management team. I was speaking directly to an offshore travel concierge service. I listened in absolute silence as my wealthy white brother-in-law frantically confirmed the details of a one-way first-class ticket to the Cayman Islands, scheduled to depart at dawn the very next morning. He demanded absolute confirmation that the offshore wire transfer he initiated had successfully cleared into a hidden account that Brianna could not access. I was completely liquidating whatever stolen funds he had left and preparing to permanently flee the country, abandoning his debt, his ruined firm, my sister, and her entirely fake baby. I remained perfectly still in the shadows, letting the recording device capture every single syllable of his desperate escape plan. Connor argued with the concierge representative about the strict baggage limitations for his private charter flight, insisting that he needed to transport several heavy secure lockboxes containing physical assets and untraceable currency. He cursed under his breath, wiping a thick layer of sweat from his forehead as he confirmed the final departure logistics. I explicitly told the representative on the phone that his wife had absolutely no idea about the travel arrangements and that under no circumstances should any confirmation emails be sent to their shared home address. The sheer magnitude of his cowardice was almost breathtaking. He had just sat in that private dining room looking me dead in the eyes, demanding I hand over 50% of my lottery winnings to secure his child's future. He had played the role of the devoted protective father and the loyal son-in-law, while secretly orchestrating a total midnight disappearance. He knew the commercial bridge loan he had fraudulently secured using my parents' estate was on the verge of total collapse. I knew the predatory lenders were closing in on his luxury vehicles and his fake corporate empire. Instead of facing the music, he was preparing to leave Brianna completely alone to face the catastrophic financial ruin he had single-handedly created. I stopped the recording on my watch, feeling a cold, sharp smile touch my lips. Connor thought he was outsmarting everyone, pulling the ultimate disappearing act before the house of cards collapsed. He had absolutely no idea that the shadow corporation he was running from was actually me. He did not know that I already owned the debt he was desperately trying to escape. I took a deep, calming breath, smoothing the fabric of my dress and preparing to walk back into the private dining room. The peace dinner was about to take a very unexpected turn. I stood perfectly still in the dim hallway as Connor terminated his international phone call. He shoved the device into his suit pocket and let out a harsh breath, rubbing his temples. I tried to step backward into the acoustic paneling to remain unseen, but my shoe scraped against the polished marble floor. Connor whipped his head around and his cold blue eyes locked directly onto mine. The brief flash of absolute panic on his face vanished in a single second, replaced by a predatory darkness I had never seen before. He did not ask how much I had overheard. He did not try to cover his tracks with a corporate lie. He simply stepped out of the secluded alcove and walked deliberately toward me, blocking my only path back to the private dining room. He backed me directly against the textured wall, pressing his hand against the wood, right next to my head. The loving family man facade completely evaporated, leaving behind a desperate, cornered animal. He leaned in close enough that I could smell the expensive bourbon on his breath. "You always were the quiet, observant one, Sienna," he said, his voice devoid of any artificial warmth. "You heard the travel arrangements, so let us stop playing games and talk like adults. I know you have access to the initial lottery capital through that shadow trust you set up. I know you hired a bulldog litigation team to drag this out, but I also know you are terrified of the media campaign we are about to unleash on you." I forced my shoulders to tremble slightly, leaning away from his imposing frame to create the perfect illusion. I widened my eyes, projecting total submission and overwhelming fear. I asked him what he wanted from me. Connor smiled, a cruel, thin line that did not reach his eyes. "I want $5 million wired into an offshore account by tomorrow morning," he stated bluntly. "You give me that cash, and I will make this entire legal nightmare disappear for you. I will formally withdraw my name and my firm from the civil lawsuit. I will completely abandon your sister and her pathetic fake pregnancy. I will even hand over the internal financial documents, proving your father knowingly committed corporate fraud when he signed that commercial bridge loan. You get to keep your hundreds of millions of dollars entirely tax-free, and you get the ultimate revenge on your parents. All it costs you is $5 million, which is literal pocket change to you now." My mind raced as the recording device on my wrist captured every single syllable of his treacherous bribe. Georgia is a one-party consent state, meaning my digital watch was currently securing the final nail in his absolute destruction. But I needed him to explicitly state his crimes for the legal record. I needed him to fully admit that my sister's medical emergency was a complete fabrication used to extort me. I kept my voice small and shaky, pretending to be overwhelmed by his aggressive proposal. I told him I did not understand why he was abandoning Brianna when she was carrying his child. I asked him how he could just walk away from his own baby, especially when her doctors had put her on strict bed rest. Connor let out a harsh, degrading laugh that echoed in the empty hallway. "There is no baby Sienna," he sneered, stepping even closer. "Brianna is not pregnant and she never has been. She bought a fake positive test online because she knew you would not be able to handle the public guilt of stressing out an expectant mother. Your sister is a desperate broke liability who spends money faster than I can steal it. And your father is an arrogant fool who handed me the keys to his entire estate just because he wanted to brag about having a successful white son-in-law at his country club. They are all sinking, and I am not letting them drag me down with them." I let a single tear slide down my cheek, playing the role of the broken, betrayed daughter perfectly. I whispered that I was terrified of what my father would do if he found out I paid him off. I asked Connor if he was absolutely sure he could provide the documents to put Terrence in prison and stop the lawsuit permanently. Connor nodded eagerly, his greed completely blinding his judgment. He promised he had the hard drives ready to hand over the second the $5 million cleared his offshore account in the Cayman Islands. He pulled a small, pristine business card from his pocket and scribbled a complex routing number on the back of it, pressing it firmly into the palm of my shaking hand. He told me I had exactly 12 hours to make the transfer, or he would go straight to the media and ruin my life forever. He stepped back, adjusting his suit jacket and replacing his mask of corporate respectability. He told me to go back into the dining room and play along until the dinner was over. I nodded, meekly clutching the business card and promising I would call my wealth managers the moment I got back to my hotel. Connor smiled victoriously, truly believing he had successfully extorted his terrified sister-in-law. He turned and walked back toward the private dining room, leaving me alone in the hallway. I waited until the heavy oak doors closed behind him before I stopped the recording on my watch. I securely saved the audio file to my encrypted cloud storage and forwarded a copy directly to Cassandra at the litigation firm. The trap was fully set, and Connor had just gleefully locked himself inside it. I took a deep breath, smoothed my dark dress, and walked back into the private room. I sat through the remainder of that agonizing dinner, listening to my parents preach about family values and unity. I watched Brianna tenderly hold her flat stomach, while Connor poured her sparkling water, playing the devoted husband one last time. When the dessert plates were cleared, I politely excused myself, claiming the emotional exhaustion was simply too much for me to handle. My father looked highly satisfied, believing his psychological warfare had successfully broken my resistance. I walked out of that high-end steakhouse and stepped into the cool Atlanta night air. My shadow corporation was already preparing the final foreclosure documents. My legal team was currently drafting the criminal extortion referrals based on the audio recording I just secured. The entire fake empire my family had built was officially scheduled for total financial demolition. I slept incredibly well that night, knowing the endgame was finally in motion. The next morning, my burner phone vibrated aggressively on the nightstand, just as the sun began to rise. I expected it to be a frantic message from Connor demanding his $5 million wire transfer to his hidden Cayman Islands bank account. Instead, I opened the screen to find an urgent demanding text from my mother, Valerie. The message was typed in all capital letters and filled with absolute panic. She demanded I come to the Atlanta General Hospital, immediately abandoning whatever plans I had made for the day. Terrence had collapsed in the master bathroom just an hour prior. The message claimed my father had suffered a massive, terrifying heart attack brought on by the immense psychological stress of our ongoing family conflict. By the time I drove through the chaotic morning traffic of downtown Atlanta, my hands were gripping the steering wheel with quiet precision. The frantic text message from my mother claimed my father had suffered a massive heart attack and was currently fighting for his life in the cardiac intensive care unit. According to Valerie, the sheer psychological weight of my supposed greed had literally broken his heart. Any normal daughter would have been blinded by absolute panic, running red lights and crying hysterically to reach the emergency room. But I was not dealing with a normal family. I was dealing with desperate, cornered predators who were rapidly running out of time and financial leverage. I walked through the sliding glass doors of the hospital and navigated the sterile, brightly lit corridors until I reached the private cardiac waiting wing. The moment I stepped through the double doors, I felt the collective hostility of my entire extended family locking onto me. Aunts, uncles, and cousins who had completely ignored my existence for years were sitting in the plush waiting area, casting looks of pure, undisguised disgust in my direction. They had clearly been fed the twisted victim narrative my parents manufactured over the past few weeks. My mother Valerie launched herself from a leather sofa the second she saw me. She did not embrace me or seek comfort. She pointed a trembling manicured finger directly at my face. "You did this!" She screamed, her voice echoing off the hospital walls and drawing the attention of passing nurses. "Your absolute selfishness put your father in that hospital bed, Sienna. He worked his entire life to provide for you, and you repay him by trying to bankrupt this family. If he does not survive this day, his blood is entirely on your hands." I kept my expression perfectly neutral, refusing to give my hovering relatives the satisfaction of seeing me break under their judgment. I calmly asked which room my father was in. Valerie glared at me, wiping away tears that magically never smeared her perfect makeup. She grabbed my arm with surprising force and pulled me down the hallway toward a private corner suite. The hospital room was kept intentionally dim. The blinds were drawn tightly shut, and the rhythmic beeping of a heart monitor filled the heavy silence. Terrence lay in the center of the bed wearing a pale hospital gown. He looked uncharacteristically weak and frail, with transparent tubes trailing from his arms and chest. Brianna sat on his left side, holding his hand and weeping softly. Connor stood dutifully in the corner, projecting the image of a strong, reliable son-in-law holding down the fort during a tragic family crisis. My father slowly turned his head toward the door, letting out a long, ragged sigh as I approached the foot of the bed. "Sienna," he rasped, his voice trembling with manufactured exhaustion. "I did not think you would come. I thought the money had completely erased your love for us." I stood silently watching the performance unfold. Terrence weakly reached out his free hand, gesturing toward a rolling bedside table. Sitting right next to his plastic water pitcher was the exact same stack of legal documents Connor had tried to force on me the night before. The agreement demanding I sign over 50% of my lottery winnings into their fraudulent family trust. "I do not have much time left," Sienna, my father whispered, squeezing his eyes shut as if battling immense physical pain. "The doctors say my heart is failing. The stress of this legal battle is killing me. Please do not let me die knowing my family is torn apart. Sign the trust agreement today. Protect your sister and the new baby. Give me the peace of mind to know my legacy is secure before I take my last breath." Brianna let out a loud, dramatic sob, pressing her face into the hospital blankets. Connor stepped forward, looking at me with severe disapproval. "Just sign the papers, Sienna," he demanded, his tone dripping with fake moral authority. "Have some basic human decency. Your father is on his deathbed, begging you to do the right thing for once in your life." I looked at the three of them acting out their desperate medical soap opera. I knew Connor was secretly planning to board a private flight to the Cayman Islands in less than 24 hours. I knew Brianna was completely faking her pregnancy. The statistical probability that my father was actually experiencing a fatal cardiac event at this exact convenient moment was highly questionable. I lowered my head, playing along with their theatrical tragedy. I told them I needed a moment to breathe because the emotional weight of seeing my father dying was simply too much for me to process all at once. I asked for a glass of ice water and slowly stepped out of the hospital room, leaving them to believe their ultimate guilt trip was working perfectly. I walked down the quiet corridor away from the waiting room until I spotted the central nursing station. The area was momentarily abandoned due to a shift change. Sitting unguarded on the central desk was an open medical chart folder with my father's name printed clearly on the top tab. "I am a senior data analyst. I spend my entire life extracting truth from raw, complex data." I quickly stepped behind the desk and flipped open the medical file, scanning the diagnostic codes and laboratory results with practiced efficiency. I did not need a medical degree to understand the numbers staring back at me. I looked directly at the troponin levels, which were the primary blood markers used to indicate actual damage to the heart muscle. The levels were completely normal. I scanned the electrocardiogram report. There was no sign of a myocardial infarction. I flipped to the attending physician's initial intake notes and read the handwritten diagnosis. Severe gastrointestinal reflux, exacerbated by acute anxiety and excessive alcohol consumption. My father was not having a massive fatal heart attack. He had a bad case of indigestion and a panic attack because his fake corporate empire was currently collapsing around him. The doctors had likely kept him for standard overnight observation out of an abundance of caution, but he was in absolutely no physical danger. The entire deathbed scenario was a highly orchestrated theatrical production designed to extort me while he was hooked up to an intravenous saline drip. I carefully closed the medical folder and stepped away from the nursing station. A cold wave of absolute clarity washed over me. There was no bottom to their depravity. They were perfectly willing to use a fake baby and a fake terminal illness to steal my wealth. I did not walk back to the hospital room to confront them. I did not return to the waiting room to argue with my extended family. I simply walked straight to the elevator, pressed the button for the ground floor, and exited the building into the warm Atlanta morning. They wanted to play games with fake medical emergencies, while their financial world secretly burned to the ground. I was going to let them sit in that hospital room waiting for a signature that was never going to come. My shadow corporation was already preparing the next phase of their destruction, and I had a lot of work to do. I woke up the next morning in the secure luxury condominium my legal team had rented for me, under an anonymous corporate name. The morning sun was just beginning to filter through the floor-to-ceiling windows when the digital watch on my wrist began vibrating with a rapid succession of urgent news alerts. I sat up in the plush bed and tapped the screen to open the notifications. Brianna had wasted absolutely no time weaponizing my departure from the hospital. She had bypassed her usual social media channels and gone straight to a notorious national tabloid known for publishing sensationalized celebrity scandals and vicious family drama. The headline was plastered across the front page of the digital publication in massive bold letters. It read, "Lottery winner sister abandons dying father out of pure greed." Below the explosive headline was a highly edited photograph of Brianna crying outside the hospital emergency room, looking utterly devastated while clutching her fake pregnant stomach. The article itself was a masterpiece of total fiction. Brianna had given an exclusive tearful interview, claiming I stormed into the cardiac intensive care unit and laughed while our father was coding on the operating table. She told the tabloid reporter that I had completely lost my mind to wealth and was actively trying to murder my own family through sheer psychological warfare. The public backlash was instantaneous and absolutely brutal. My face was being broadcast across every major morning news network in the country. Strangers were flooding the comment sections with pure hatred, calling me a sociopath, a monster, and a disgrace to my community. When I stepped out of the private parking garage of my building later that morning, a swarm of aggressive paparazzi was already waiting for me. They had somehow tracked down my temporary location. Camera flashes blinded me, as reporters shoved microphones directly into my face, screaming questions about how I could leave my own father to die for a piece of paper. I did not flinch. I did not cover my face or attempt to argue with the shouting reporters. I maintained a posture of absolute icy calm as my private security team escorted me into the back of a waiting tinted sport utility vehicle. I knew exactly what Brianna was trying to accomplish. She wanted to provoke an emotional reaction. She wanted me to issue a frantic public statement defending myself, thereby dragging me into a messy public relations war, where she controlled the entire narrative. She desperately needed me to care about my social reputation, because social status was the only currency my family actually understood. I sat in the back of the quiet vehicle and instructed my driver to take me directly to the corporate litigation firm. When I walked into the corner office overlooking the Atlanta skyline, Cassandra was already pacing behind her heavy mahogany desk. Her eyes were flashing with professional outrage. She had a team of defamation lawyers standing by, ready to issue massive cease and desist orders against the tabloid and file a multi-million-dollar slander lawsuit against Brianna. I raised my hand, signaling for Cassandra to stand down. I told her we were not going to waste a single second of our time or a single cent of our capital fighting a meaningless public relations battle. I explained that fighting in the press was a distraction meant for people who actually cared about country club invitations and high society approval. I did not care what strangers on the internet thought about me. I only cared about absolute financial demolition. I sat down in the leather chair and told Cassandra it was time to initiate phase 1 of our shadow operation. I authorized my newly formed corporate holding company to officially strike. Cassandra smiled a slow, dangerous smile and immediately dismissed the defamation lawyers from the room. She pulled out the heavy red folder containing the commercial bridge loan tied to my parents' sprawling medical supply business and their luxury mansion. She drafted a formal legally binding notice of default on behalf of our anonymous shadow corporation. The document was completely devoid of any emotion or family connection. It was a cold, calculated financial death warrant. It explicitly stated that due to 4 consecutive months of non-payment, the entire multi-million-dollar bridge loan was now immediately due in full. I did not send the document through standard postal mail. I wanted to ensure maximum psychological impact. We hired a specialized corporate courier service known for delivering high-stakes legal documents to evasive executives. I provided the courier with the exact layout of Connor and his failing private equity firm. I knew Connor was currently scrambling to hide his insolvency from his remaining investors and desperately trying to finalize his secret escape to the Cayman Islands. I sat in the quiet conference room, tracking the digital progress of our courier in real time. I knew the exact moment the courier bypassed the receptionist at the firm and walked directly into his glass-walled office. According to the delivery confirmation protocol, the courier placed the thick black envelope directly onto his desk, interrupting a supposed high-level investor meeting. The envelope required his direct physical signature to confirm receipt. I could picture the exact sequence of events unfolding across the city. Connor likely smiled his fake corporate smile at his guests, apologizing for the interruption as he signed the digital clipboard. He probably assumed the thick envelope contained routine financial documents or perhaps a settlement offer from his struggling creditors. But the moment his office was empty, he would tear open the black envelope and read the formal notice of default from his new unknown primary lien holder. He would read the stark legal text demanding immediate payment in full for the massive commercial bridge loan he had fraudulently secured using his father-in-law's entire estate. The realization would hit him like a physical blow to the chest. He was officially out of time. The predatory lenders he thought he had outsmarted had just sold his debt to a highly aggressive anonymous entity that was not interested in negotiating extensions or taking partial payments. I received the digital confirmation on my encrypted phone that the delivery was successfully completed. I knew Connor was currently sitting alone in his office, sweating profusely through his custom-tailored suit as the walls rapidly closed in around him. He would not tell Brianna about the default notice. He would absolutely not tell Terrence or Valerie that their medical supply business and their massive home were now in imminent danger of total foreclosure. He would frantically shove the legal document deep into his bottom desk drawer, turning the key and praying he could secure his offshore funds and board his private flight before the entire illusion collapsed. He believed he was still one step ahead of the disaster, hiding his ultimate failure from his arrogant family as his midnight deadline rapidly approached. The doors of the arbitration center swung shut, sealing us inside the sterile corporate environment. Today was the sworn deposition for the civil lawsuit my family filed. I walked into the expansive conference room flanked by my lead attorney Cassandra and her team. Across the polished oak table sat my entire family. Terrence and Valerie wore their absolute finest designer clothing, projecting untouchable wealth. Brianna wore a modest pastel dress, leaning into her fake fragile pregnancy routine. Connor sat at the center wearing a sharp navy suit, but his posture was noticeably rigid. I could see cold sweat on his forehead. He received my anonymous notice of default less than 24 hours ago. He knew his private equity firm was marked for total financial slaughter, but he was desperately trying to maintain his arrogant facade in front of his wealthy in-laws. The magistrate initiated the formal recording, signaling the beginning of the deposition. My family hired a very expensive, aggressive attorney who immediately launched into a fabricated narrative. He claimed the winning lottery ticket was the result of a holiday tradition where the family pooled financial resources to purchase shared investments. He called Connor to provide his sworn testimony first. Connor adjusted his tie and looked directly at the recording camera. He lied with the smooth, practiced ease of a career con artist. He stated under penalty of perjury that he personally drove to the gas station and handed my father a crisp $50 bill, instructing him to purchase 10 lottery tickets for the collective family trust. He claimed we all had a verbal agreement to divide any potential winnings into exactly 5 equal shares. Brianna was called next to corroborate his completely fictional story. She placed her hand over her flat stomach, letting out a rehearsed sigh. She swore on the legal record that we discussed the lottery pool over appetizers during Christmas dinner. She painted a beautiful fake picture of sisterly bonding, claiming I enthusiastically agreed to manage the physical tickets because I was the organized data analyst of the family. Valerie and Terrence followed her performance, nodding solemnly, backing up every single word of the perjury. They handed over printed bank statements showing a $50 ATM withdrawal from Connor's account on Christmas Eve, presenting it as absolute definitive proof of their joint financial venture. They sat back in their plush leather chairs looking incredibly smug and victorious. They truly believed their coordinated lies and expensive lawyers were enough to overwhelm the legal system. They thought they had trapped me in an inescapable web of family testimony without any escape. Cassandra did not look impressed. She slowly stood up from her chair, picking up a single black electronic tablet. She walked over to the large digital presentation screen mounted on the conference room wall. She told the magistrate she had a few minor clarifying questions regarding the timeline of this supposed family investment pool. Cassandra pulled up the bank statement Connor submitted as evidence. She pointed out the timestamp of his ATM withdrawal, which occurred at exactly 8:15 on Christmas Eve. She then pulled up a highly secure data log obtained directly from the State Lottery Commission through a judicial subpoena. The data log showed the exact second the winning ticket was printed and purchased at the local gas station. The timestamp on the winning ticket was December 23rd at 4:30 in the afternoon, a full 28 hours before Connor even withdrew his cash. The color instantly drained from Connor's face. His expensive attorney shifted uncomfortably in his chair, realizing his client just submitted a wildly inaccurate timeline under oath, threatening his career. Cassandra was just getting started. She turned her attention to Brianna, asking her to confirm once again that the family discussed the lottery pool over appetizers. Brianna swallowed hard, her eyes darting nervously toward her husband, but she doubled down and said yes. Cassandra tapped the screen of her tablet. She presented a high-definition video downloaded directly from Brianna's own social media account. It was the live broadcast she posted during our Christmas dinner. The video played loudly in the quiet deposition room. My mother's voice echoed explicitly, stating she and Terrence did not know what to get me, since I just stared at spreadsheets all day. The video showed Valerie sliding the envelope across the table to me. Then my father's booming voice filled the room, stating clearly that it was just a joke, and they bought it as a singular gift, hoping I would win $50 to fix my old car. The video concluded with Connor mocking my career and telling me to give the money back as a return on investment if I won. There was no mention of a family pool. There was only undeniable high-definition proof of their cruel mockery, confirming the ticket was a personal gift. Cassandra turned off the screen, looking directly at my family's legal team. She informed them she was formally submitting the video and timestamp discrepancies to the district attorney for immediate criminal perjury charges against all 4 of them. She stated that trying to defraud a rightful lottery winner, using fabricated evidence and coordinated perjury, was a severe felony offense carrying mandatory prison time. The opposing counsel practically leapt out of his chair, calling for an immediate emergency recess. He pulled Connor and my father into the hallway. Through the thick glass walls, I watched the lawyer aggressively yelling at his clients, realizing they completely lied to him and destroyed his professional credibility. Less than 10 minutes later, they marched back into the room. The lawyer formally announced on the legal record that his clients were immediately withdrawing their civil lawsuit with extreme prejudice, dropping all claims to the ticket. As we walked out, I saw my family near the valet station looking decimated. Connor nervously checked his phone, looking for a response to the shadow default notice he was secretly hiding. Terrence looked sick, realizing he lost his leverage. But Valerie refused to accept defeat. She loudly announced to Brianna they needed to finalize the guest list for the annual Black Excellence Charity Gala they were hosting next weekend. She proclaimed it would secure emergency elite investors for Connor's firm. I kept walking toward my waiting car as a cold, brilliant strategy formed in my mind. They were throwing a massive public gala to save a firm I already secretly owned. I did not wait for my family to send out their formal invitations to their fake charity event. I sat in the back of my private security vehicle and called my wealth management team immediately. The legal grace period for the shadow default notice I sent to Connor had officially expired at midnight. He failed to make any attempt to contact the anonymous corporate entity holding his massive commercial debt. I was too busy lying under oath in a deposition room and planning fake charity galas to realize his financial execution had already begun. I instructed my asset managers to immediately activate the physical repossession protocols for the matte black luxury vehicle my parents purchased on Christmas night. I requested the recovery team to wear active body cameras during the operation, citing the highly volatile nature of the debtors involved. I wanted a front row seat to the exact moment my sister's flawless digital reality violently collided with actual consequences. Less than 2 hours later, I sat in the living room of my secure luxury condominium, watching a high-definition live stream broadcast directly to my encrypted tablet. The recovery team pulled a massive heavy-duty tow truck right into the center of the circular driveway at my sister and brother-in-law's sprawling suburban mansion. The pristine neighborhood was perfectly quiet until the heavy diesel engine shattered the peace. Two large recovery agents stepped out of the truck and immediately began securing heavy steel chains to the front axle of the luxury vehicle. I watched the screen intently as the massive oak front door of the house swung open. Brianna marched out onto the concrete wearing a silk designer bathrobe and holding her cell phone like a weapon. She immediately began screaming at the top of her lungs, demanding the men step away from her property. She held her flat stomach with one hand leaning into her completely fabricated high-risk pregnancy routine, while pointing her phone directly at the agents with the other. She threatened to broadcast their faces to her hundreds of thousands of online followers, claiming they were targeting a successful black woman out of pure jealousy. She threatened to call the police for trespassing and harassment. The lead recovery agent did not even blink. He simply handed her a thick clipboard holding the legally binding default documentation. He calmly informed her that the vehicle was severely delinquent and the primary lien holder demanded immediate physical asset recovery. Brianna slapped the clipboard out of his hand, screaming that the vehicle was fully paid for in cash by her wealthy parents. She genuinely believed her own lies. She had absolutely no idea her husband had financed the car through a predatory subprime lender to maintain their fake affluent lifestyle. Connor burst through the front door a few seconds later. He was wearing expensive athletic clothes and looked completely frantic. He grabbed Brianna by the arm, pulling her back toward the massive columns of the front porch, away from the prying eyes of the wealthy neighbors who were beginning to step out onto their manicured lawns. He quickly stepped toward the recovery agents, plastering his fake corporate smile across his sweating face. I watched the live feed as he pulled his leather wallet from his pocket, trying to discreetly hand the lead agent a stack of $100 bills. He whispered frantically, begging the men to just unhook the chains and give him 24 hours to clear up the misunderstanding. He claimed he was a highly successful private equity director and promised to double their salary if they just drove away before the neighborhood gossip started. The recovery agent completely ignored the pathetic bribe. He signaled his partner to activate the hydraulic winch. The heavy steel chains tightened, and the $90,000 luxury vehicle was violently dragged up onto the flatbed of the tow truck. Brianna started crying real hysterical tears, demanding to know what was happening to her precious Christmas gift. Connor turned to his wife and lied with absolute flawless precision. He wrapped his arms around her shaking shoulders and swore it was just a massive clerical error at his private banking institution. He claimed a rogue computer algorithm had accidentally flagged their account due to a massive incoming international wire transfer and froze their autopay system. He promised her he would make one simple phone call to his elite wealth managers and have the car returned to their driveway before dinner. I watched the tow truck pull away from the mansion, leaving the golden couple standing completely empty-handed in their driveway. Connor looked absolutely terrified. He knew the repossession was not a clerical error. He knew the anonymous shadow corporation holding his debt was officially coming for his blood, and he had absolutely no capital left to stop them. He was actively watching his fake empire burn to the ground, but he was too arrogant and cowardly to admit his total failure to his wife. I turned off the live stream, feeling a deep, cold satisfaction settling into my bones. I had just taken back the exact weapon they used to humiliate me on Christmas night. I spent the rest of the afternoon working with Cassandra to finalize the massive commercial foreclosure documents for my parents' medical supply business and their luxury estate. We were preparing to drop the absolute final hammer on their entire existence. But my family still believed they held one final card to play. The secure intercom system in my condominium chimed loudly, interrupting my focus. The building concierge informed me that a specialized private courier had just dropped off a highly secure package requiring my direct signature. I instructed the concierge to send the package up through the private elevator. A few minutes later, I was holding a thick, heavy envelope made of expensive textured cardstock. The front of the envelope was sealed with dark red wax bearing my parents' custom family crest. I broke the wax seal and pulled out a massive gold-foiled invitation. The elegant cursive text invited me as a highly honored special guest to the annual Black Excellence Charity Gala hosted at the Magnolia Estate next Saturday evening. A smaller handwritten note fell out of the envelope and fluttered onto my desk. It was written in my mother's custom sharp handwriting. The note was not an apology for their coordinated perjury or a plea for forgiveness. It was a thinly veiled corporate threat wrapped in high society etiquette. I traced the embossed gold lettering of the gala invitation, with my fingertips recognizing the desperate psychology behind their grand maneuver. She wrote that the entire elite community of Atlanta was eagerly expecting the newly minted lottery billionaire to make a monumental public appearance. She explicitly stated that the media would be present and that my failure to attend and publicly pledge a massive financial donation to Connor and his charitable foundation would completely destroy my social reputation forever. They were trying to trap me. They wanted to force me into a room filled with powerful, wealthy elites and use overwhelming social peer pressure to publicly extort my winnings to save a firm I already secretly owned. I held the heavy gold-foiled envelope in my hands, tracing the raised, embossed lettering of my parents' custom family crest. Valerie and Terrence truly believed they had engineered the ultimate, inescapable social trap. They were absolutely certain that bringing me into a sprawling ballroom filled with the most powerful, wealthy elites in the entire city of Atlanta would completely paralyze me. They assumed I would revert to the quiet, submissive data analyst who spent her entire life shrinking into the background to avoid their harsh criticism. They genuinely thought the immense peer pressure of standing in front of local politicians, corporate executives, and high society socialites would force me to smile politely and hand over a massive percentage of my lottery winnings just to avoid a public scene. They fundamentally misunderstood who they were dealing with. I did not throw the invitation into the trash. I picked up my encrypted cell phone and sent a brief message directly to Cassandra at the litigation firm, telling her to formally submit my completely enthusiastic official response. I was going to attend their fake charity gala. If my family wanted a public spectacle, I decided I would give them a performance they would never forget. For my entire life, my mother and sister had dictated how I presented myself to the world intentionally, forcing me to wear muted colors and conservative styles to ensure I never outshone Brianna at any family event. That era was officially over. I reached out to an exclusive celebrity stylist based in Buckhead, known for dressing elite clientele for high-profile red carpet events. I wired her a generous retainer fee and requested a private fitting at my secure luxury condominium. I told her I needed a gown that did not just look expensive but projected absolute undeniable dominance. The stylist arrived the next afternoon with racks of breathtaking couture garments. We spent hours sorting through various silhouettes and fabrics until I found the exact weapon I wanted to wear. It was a custom-tailored floor-length gown crafted from deep emerald green silk that moved like liquid glass when I walked. The design featured a sharp structured shoulder and a dramatic plunging back, projecting a predatory kind of elegance that commanded absolute attention. I paired the stunning dress with a single delicate diamond necklace and matching earrings, entirely skipping the loud, flashy jewelry my mother always favored. I did not need massive logos or oversized diamonds to prove my wealth. The sheer quality of the tailoring and the quiet confidence in my posture would speak volumes. While I was meticulously preparing my armor, my family was frantically trying to keep their sinking ship afloat just long enough to reach Saturday night. Through the discreet surveillance initiated by my legal team, I learned the exact extent of their desperate maneuvering. Connor was actively dodging calls from his remaining angry investors, promising them that a massive influx of capital was guaranteed to arrive immediately following the charity event. I was completely relying on my extorted donation to either temporarily pacify his angry creditors or fully fund his secret midnight escape to the Cayman Islands. He still had absolutely no idea that his commercial debt had been purchased by my shadow corporation. He actually believed he was successfully hiding the impending foreclosure from his arrogant wife and his wealthy in-laws. Brianna was equally consumed by her own toxic delusions. She spent the entire week posting daily social media updates about her fake pregnancy, using her supposed fragile medical condition to garner sympathy from her followers. She posted videos of herself picking out floral arrangements for the gala, complaining about how the extreme stress of my greed was causing her severe physical pain. She was intentionally setting the stage to play the ultimate victim at the event, ensuring the entire Atlanta elite community would view me as a heartless monster before I even walked through the ballroom doors. Terrence and Valerie were busy calling every major media outlet in the city, promising them an exclusive front row seat to a beautiful story of family reconciliation and unprecedented charitable giving. They were completely setting themselves up for a legendary public execution. The day of the gala finally arrived, carrying a cold, heavy sense of absolute finality. I spent the afternoon at the corporate litigation firm, sitting across the mahogany table from Cassandra. We were definitely not reviewing settlement offers or drafting negotiation tactics. We were assembling the precise instruments of my family's total financial destruction. I placed 3 thick manila folders onto the polished wood surface, running my hands over the smooth paper. The first folder contained the certified bank statements and the corporate audit reports, definitively proving that Connor was completely bankrupt. It held the irrefutable evidence that he had fraudulently leveraged my parents' sprawling mansion and their medical supply chain business to fund his fake private equity empire. The second folder contained the verified audio recording captured by my digital watch outside the steakhouse, where Connor explicitly admitted Brianna was faking her pregnancy and begged me for a $5 million bribe to abandon her. The third and final folder was the most important weapon of all. It contained the finalized legally binding notices of default and the active foreclosure documents proving that my anonymous shadow corporation officially owned every single piece of their lives. Cassandra looked at the 3 folders and then looked up at me with a sharp, proud smile. She knew the trap was completely set, and there was absolutely no way for them to escape the blast radius. I carefully placed the manila folders into a sleek black leather portfolio, ensuring they were perfectly organized for the sequence I had planned. I thanked Cassandra for her brilliant tactical execution and walked out of the corner office, heading back to my condominium to prepare for the evening. I stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling mirror in my bedroom, adjusting the emerald green silk of my gown. The woman staring back at me was completely unrecognizable from the quiet sister who had been repeatedly mocked and dismissed on Christmas night. She was cold, calculated, and completely untouchable. I picked up the black leather portfolio and walked out to the private parking garage where my security team was waiting in a tinted vehicle. I instructed my driver to head directly toward the Magnolia estate. The time for hiding behind corporate attorneys and shadow companies was officially over. It was finally time for the absolute ultimate payoff. The heavy tinted windows of my private security vehicle rolled down just enough for me to see the absolute spectacle unfolding outside the Magnolia estate. My parents had pulled out every single stop for their fake charity event. The sprawling 50-acre property was illuminated by massive floodlights cutting through the dark Atlanta sky. A long velvet red carpet stretched from the grand wrought iron gates all the way up the marble steps of the main entrance. I could see local politicians, corporate executives, and the highest echelon of the city elite mingling near the valet station. Dozens of photographers and local media representatives were crammed behind velvet ropes, waiting to capture the highly anticipated arrival of the newly minted lottery billionaire. I took a slow, deep breath, smoothing the cool emerald green silk of my custom gown over my legs. I picked up my black leather portfolio and signaled my driver to pull directly up to the carpet. The moment the heavy car door opened, the flash of 100 camera bulbs nearly blinded me. I stepped out onto the red carpet, projecting absolute cold confidence. I did not wave or smile at the shouting reporters who were desperately begging for a statement regarding my supposed family feud. I walked with the slow, measured pace of a woman who owned the very ground she was stepping on, which was a literal legal fact. Before I could even make it halfway to the grand entrance, my parents suddenly appeared from the opulent foyer. Terrence and Valerie rushed down the marble steps, playing their designated roles for the flashing cameras. Valerie wrapped her arms around my shoulders, pulling me into a fiercely tight embrace. She pressed her cheek against mine, turning her face perfectly toward the press pool, so they could capture the beautiful moment of family reconciliation. "You are going to ruin this dress," Valerie hissed directly into my ear, her voice completely inaudible to the reporters. "You smile and you play along tonight, Sienna, or we will make sure you never show your face in this city again." Terrence stepped up next, wrapping his large hand around my upper arm with a painful bruising grip. He turned to the cameras and let out a booming, joyful laugh. "We are so incredibly blessed to have our beautiful daughter here with us tonight," he announced to the press pool, his voice dripping with fake paternal pride. He pulled me closer, leaning his heavy head down toward my shoulder. "You are going to walk into that ballroom, and you are going to write a check for $20 million tonight," he muttered through gritted teeth. "You are going to save your brother-in-law and apologize to your sister." I did not pull away from his painful grip. I simply turned my head and looked my father directly in his eyes, letting a cold, dead smile touch my lips. "We will see exactly what happens inside, Dad," I whispered softly. They escorted me into the massive grand ballroom, like a prized captive being paraded before the ruling class. The room was dripping with excessive, overwhelming luxury. Massive crystal chandeliers hung from the vaulted ceilings, casting a warm golden glow over 70 circular tables covered in pristine white silk. Brianna and Connor were holding court near the main stage, looking incredibly smug and victorious. Brianna was wearing a flowing white maternity gown, cradling her flat stomach, while wealthy socialites offered congratulations. Connor was shaking hands with local bank executives, projecting the image of a thriving private equity director. They seated me at the primary head table right in the absolute center of the room. The entire evening felt like a surreal theatrical production directed entirely by my parents. I sat quietly sipping sparkling water, while course after course of expensive gourmet food was served to the elite guests. I watched my family aggressively work the room, completely intoxicated by the attention and the perceived financial power they held over me. They truly believed their public ambush was working perfectly. They thought my silence was absolute submission to their social blackmail. As the dessert plates were cleared away, the ambient background music slowly faded out. The heavy velvet curtains near the main stage parted, and my mother Valerie confidently walked up the steps toward the clear acrylic podium. She adjusted the microphone, tapping it gently to demand the attention of the entire ballroom. The room fell completely silent as hundreds of wealthy guests turned their focus to the matriarch of the family. Valerie let out a slow, trembling breath, wiping a carefully manufactured tear from the corner of her eye. She thanked everyone for gathering tonight to support their charitable foundation and their ongoing community initiatives. Then she shifted her gaze directly toward my table. She launched into a highly orchestrated, tear-jerking speech about the intense trials and tribulations of family loyalty. She spoke beautifully about how sudden, overwhelming wealth can deeply confuse a young woman and lead her down a dark, lonely path of greed and isolation. But the ultimate power of family always prevails. Valerie announced, her voice echoing powerfully through the massive ballroom speakers. She placed her hand over her heart, looking down at me with overwhelming fake compassion. My daughter Sienna recently came into an extraordinary financial blessing, and tonight she has decided to use that incredible blessing to heal our family and support our legacy. She has agreed to step up to this podium tonight and make a monumental multi-million-dollar financial donation directly to Connor's foundation, ensuring the unity of this family remains unbroken. The crowd erupted into deafening applause. Wealthy executives and local celebrities rose from their chairs, giving my mother a massive standing ovation for her beautiful message of forgiveness and redemption. The house lights instantly dimmed, and a massive, brilliant white spotlight swung across the dark room, landing directly on me. Every single eye in the ballroom was locked onto my face, expecting me to crumble under the immense social pressure and submit to their blatant public extortion. I did not shrink away from the blinding light. I slowly stood up from my chair, picking up the heavy black leather portfolio resting on the table in front of me. I looked at Valerie standing triumphantly on the stage, and I let a calm, predatory smile spread completely across my face. I walked slowly and deliberately toward the podium, ready to deliver a speech they would absolutely never forget. The heavy crystal glasses clinked loudly across the massive mahogany dining table inside my parents' sprawling Atlanta estate. The sprawling 50-acre property was illuminated by massive floodlights cutting through the dark night sky. The crystal chandeliers hung heavily above us, casting a warm golden glow over the exquisite catered meal that I could barely stomach. My mother Valerie beamed with absolute pride as my father Terence tossed a heavy set of keys across the polished wood. My older sister Brianna let out a deafening shriek, catching the keys with her perfectly manicured hands, shaking with pure excitement. Sitting right outside in the circular driveway was a brand new matte black Range Rover wrapped in a massive red velvet bow. My parents owned a highly lucrative medical supply chain, and they absolutely never missed an opportunity to display their extreme wealth to anyone who would pay attention. Brianna was their ultimate trophy daughter, functioning as a high-powered public relations director who fit perfectly into their curated social image. Her husband Connor, a wealthy white private equity director, always looked down on anyone who did not meet his exacting financial standards. Connor slowly stood up, adjusting his custom-tailored suit jacket, and raised his glass of imported champagne. He offered a highly smug toast to Black excellence and to his beautiful wife, who he claimed deserved nothing but the absolute best life had to offer. My parents practically melted in their seats at his calculated words. They lived for this exact aesthetic, portraying the flawless upper-class family, hosting the perfect holiday dinner for their elite circles. I sat completely quietly at the far end of the long table, cutting my roasted vegetables and trying to remain entirely invisible. But in my family, invisibility was simply never an option. My mother turned her sharp attention directly to me. She slid a thin, cheap paper envelope across the expensive wood surface. She told me that she and my father did not know what to get me for Christmas, since I was still just staring at boring spreadsheets all day. I told her softly that I was a senior data analyst as I picked up the light envelope. Inside was a single $5 Mega Millions lottery ticket. Brianna let out a sharp, cruel laugh that echoed in the large dining room. She told me that since I refused to let Connor look over my pathetic little retirement fund, my parents figured a cheap lottery ticket was my only real chance at making any actual money in this lifetime. She sneered and added that since I clearly was not climbing the corporate ladder anytime soon, I might actually need that $5 to pay off my remaining student loans. I forced my facial expression to remain perfectly neutral, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing my pain. My father let out a booming laugh, echoing through the room. He told me to lighten up, claiming it was just a harmless joke. He said they bought the ticket at that dirty little gas station right down the street from my apartment building. He mocked me, saying maybe I would win $50 and could finally afford to upgrade the 10-year-old sedan parked out front, which he claimed was bringing down the property value of their entire gated neighborhood. Connor chuckled, taking another slow sip of his expensive champagne. He told my parents that if I actually won anything, I should immediately give the money back to them as a return on their initial investment. I looked at the four of them sitting there in their designer clothes, surrounded by absurd luxury, finding endless entertainment in my perceived financial failures. They bonded over my humiliation, using my quiet life to make themselves feel infinitely superior. I slipped the $5 ticket into the pocket of my coat and stood up from the table. I quietly thanked them for the dinner and walked straight out the front door, leaving them to their perfect elite evening. I was completely used to being the punchline of their cruel jokes. 3 days later, I was sitting alone in my small, modest apartment, drinking black coffee and watching the early morning news broadcast. The local news anchor smiled brightly through the television screen. She cheerfully announced to anyone feeling lucky that the sole winning ticket for the record-breaking $370 million Mega Millions jackpot was sold right here in Atlanta at the Chevron station on 5th and Main. I froze completely. My ceramic coffee mug hovered halfway to my mouth. 5th and Main was the exact gas station located just 1 block down the street from my apartment complex. It was the precise location my father had mockingly mentioned on Christmas night. My hands started to tremble so uncontrollably that I had to set the mug down on the kitchen counter before I dropped it. Coffee sloshed over the rim, staining the counter, but I did not care. I rushed down the narrow hallway and pulled the crumpled paper envelope from my winter coat pocket. The winning numbers flashed boldly in bright graphics on the television screen. 4, 17, 33, 46, 52, and the mega ball was 9. I looked down at the cheap printed ticket resting in my sweating palm. I read the first number printed on the paper. 4. My breath hitched in my throat. 17. 33. My vision actually started to blur as my heart hammered violently against my ribs. 46. 52. And the mega ball was a perfect 9. Every single number on the ticket matched the screen flawlessly. I stared at the television screen, then looked back at the small piece of paper in my hand. I did not scream out loud or cry tears of immense joy. Instead, a heavy, terrifying silence settled over my entire body. I had $370 million sitting right there in the palm of my hand. In a single heartbeat, my entire life was permanently and irrevocably altered. I was no longer the struggling data analyst they constantly pitied and belittled. I was instantly a woman possessing more wealth than my parents and my arrogant brother-in-law combined. And then my cell phone started ringing. It was Brianna. Her name flashed aggressively across the glowing screen of my phone. I ignored the call, completely letting it go to voicemail. Exactly 2 seconds later, my mother called. I declined it immediately. Then my father called. Then Connor tried to reach me. Within 10 short, agonizing minutes, I had accumulated exactly 89 missed calls from the people who had just humiliated me. Then, a text message from my mother popped up, changing my stunned shock into sheer absolute panic. The message read that they knew it was me and that I bought that ticket with their family money, so I better open my apartment door right now or they were calling the police. They had watched the morning news. They knew the exact ticket they bought as a cruel gag gift was the ultimate jackpot winner. Before I could even begin to process the reality of their aggressive threat, a loud, violent pounding echoed through the hallway. My father yelled for me to open the door right now. His voice boomed through the thin wood of my apartment entrance. He sounded frantic, completely out of breath, and entirely unhinged. I could hear Connor yelling loudly in the background, demanding that I surrender the asset immediately. I backed away from the door, clutching the multi-million-dollar piece of paper tightly against my chest. The very people who had mocked me and treated me like absolute garbage just 72 hours ago were now standing in my hallway, ready to tear my front door down, to steal the exact same item they had used to humiliate me. The thin walls of my apartment seemed to vibrate with every single heavy blow against the doorframe. My mind raced through 1,000 different terrifying scenarios as the relentless pounding continued to echo in my small living space. The sheer desperation in their voices proved they were willing to do absolutely anything to rip this newfound wealth directly from my hands. They wanted to reclaim their absolute dominance over my life, and they were willing to use physical force to maintain their twisted family hierarchy. Sienna's story highlights that self-worth is not defined by those who constantly belittle us. When she achieved massive wealth, it served as a mirror exposing her family's toxic greed and superficiality. The most vital lesson is that maintaining composure under pressure is a superpower. While her family used chaos and manipulation to steal her success, Sienna's analytical focus became her ultimate defense. Boundaries are essential barriers against those who only value you when you are convenient. Never let the people who dismissed your potential dictate your value. True strength lies in remaining unshaken while those around you unravel. Discover how Sienna masterfully outsmarted her toxic family. Read the full gripping story now.